Welcome to the Codcast. I'm Bruce Moll from Commonwealth Magazine, and I'm joined by the Mayor of New Bedford, Jon Mitchell. Mayor, thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you as always, Bruce.
Let's start with a topic that for years has seemed more theoretical than real, but now seems to be on the verge of becoming very real: offshore wind. Vineyard Wind, the nation's first large-scale offshore wind farm, looks like it is on track with the Biden administration. Now that the industry is starting to take shape, Mayor, can you sort of run us through what does that mean for New Bedford? What do you see happening down there?
Yeah, sure, Bruce. And yeah, your opening lines remind me of how many times I've been accused of waiting for a Godot when I talk about offshore wind. But it is about to be very real, and it's something that we've been working on for many years here in New Bedford, really since I got into office in 2012. We sort of start with a foundational point, which is, in a city that's not part of a major metro, it's really hard to come by private capital these days. And superstar cities like Boston and others have pulled in the lion's share of investment in America over really the last couple of decades. And we see offshore wind in that context. Offshore wind is really a generational opportunity for a city like ours to leverage its competitive advantages in a way that brings in investment, creates jobs, and elevates the city's quality of life. And that's why we've pursued it so intentionally over many years now. And it's proceeded in fits and starts. As you know, for up until really a couple of years ago, it was closely associated with one project, the Cape Wind project. And in some ways, I think the industry was looked at somewhat narrowly as a result. But the track record of the industry in Europe has spoken for itself. It's an industry that's been maturing in Europe for some 25, almost 30 years now, and it has been responsible for an astounding amount of prosperity in older industrial ports like ours that are just like ours, places like Bremerhaven, Germany, Cuxhaven, Germany, Esbjerg, Denmark, Hull, England. These are all places that had fallen on tough times. Some of them were fishing ports. And the offshore wind industry brought in a considerable amount of investment into their ports, into their manufacturing sectors, and into their professional sectors. And they are very different places as a result. And in order to get people to believe in offshore wind, we did trade missions over to those places so that we could help evangelize the industry here. And I think that's played out very well. But the wait, as you noted, has been long. And but here we are on the doorstep of the Vineyard Wind project, which will be America's first industrial scale project and the first of what appears to be many. We think that we're looking at roughly a $3 billion capital expenditure with this project. So that means a considerable amount of local procurement here in New Bedford for starters, from things as simple as hotel rooms and restaurant restaurant food to welders to any number of things. But it also means that the more that the industry settles in here, the higher the likelihood that there will be investment in operating facilities and permanent enterprises. And that really is for us the ultimate goal, to have an industry cluster here, much like the industry cluster that we have in fishing. For us, it's not enough just to be one of several ports that the industry calls home along the East Coast. Our goal is to be the leader, and we think we say that not just because it's good PR, but because having being seen as a leader is an important tactic in attracting investment. We were very well positioned, both in terms of our infrastructure and our geographic proximity to the wind areas to be a leader, and we're trying to race out ahead of everybody else so that we can establish a sustainable cluster here.
Mayor, you mentioned it's a $3 billion capital investment, and you mentioned hotel rooms and restaurant meals and what have you. But how much of that 3 billion now, Vineyard Wind is calling New Bedford its sort of base port, if I'm understanding it correctly.
It's marshaling port. Yep.
But what does that mean? What does that mean locally? Because the perception is that at least initially, these initial projects, a lot of stuff is going to be coming over from Europe that is going to be used to build these projects. How much of that 3 billion do you think is actually going to be spent in New Bedford, for example, or just in the United States?
Yeah, so $3 billion is a big pie, so we don't have to have a sizable slice of it to really benefit from the project. Most of the big components are going to be manufactured overseas. There may be some manufacturing of what's called secondary steel here, the parts that are attached to the components. But a lot of what will happen here will be that will be significant to the local economy is increased demand for maritime services. I mean, New Bedford, as you know, is the biggest commercial fishing port in the United States. We have a full service harbor here that has all the ancillary businesses that support the fishing industry, right? So the fueling companies and the clearing houses and the welding shops and really runs the gamut. And a lot of those outfits will and already have received business from the offshore wind industry. And once the Vineyard Wind project gets the green light, that's all about to ramp up. So we do see demand for already established maritime businesses here, but we also foresee the demand for folks who operate out on the water. Fishermen these days don't spend their entire year out on the water, right, as they once did. And historically, fishermen would go out, come back for a couple of days, go out again. These days, after a considerable change in the industry, these days they have a much more time in their year to devote to other things, and so this can help fill that gap, which will be good. We also know that eventually manufacturing will come to the United States. New Bedford probably isn't in the running for too much in the way of the manufacturing of major components just because of space constraints here. We're a pretty densely developed place, especially in our waterfront. But we will see some light manufacturing here. We will see, probably most significantly, operations and maintenance facilities here, which are unlike the deployment phase of an offshore wind farm, last for the life of the project. So if a company establishes an O&M base here for the life of the project, they will be here for 20 to 25 years, if not more. And so that we see ourselves as being in the pole position to gain that sort of that line of business in the offshore wind industry. So that's the way we see it. In our job right now, we do have an arrangement set up with Vineyard Wind, which is essentially a local first program, a procurement program that's based on a similar program in Grenada, Denmark. And it's essentially this: that we have in effect a one-stop shop in the New Bedford Ocean cluster, where Vineyard Wind will direct its contractors to go for any manner of things, ranging from again, the sandwiches from the restaurant to hotel rooms to hardware stores to marine supply companies to fueling companies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's having that clearinghouse with an emphasis on local procurement that I think will help facilitate the demand for local services.
So one thing I'm always puzzled about, but so this is all new to the United States, and we have something called the Jones Act, which says, now you're going to have to correct me because I probably have this wrong, but so if something is being transported from, let's say, well, maybe you know it better than I do. My sense is that we don't have enough ships, U.S. flagships, that can operate sort of shuttling out to the wind farms and transporting what needs to go out there. That is that a problem that the federal government's going to have to resolve, that we don't have, because it sort of seems to imply that you're going to have ships come over from Europe to do the installation of these turbines. And is that holding us back here?
I think the short answer is no. It may be slowing things up a little bit, but it's not holding back the introduction of manufacturing in the United States. What's really holding up the introduction of manufacturing in the U.S. is the still undeveloped pipeline that would justify establishing factories here. We need more of a predictable throughput of projects that would justify a manufacturer to come over somewhere in the United States to set up shop. The other thing that's slowing, I think, the establishment of manufacturing here is just the availability of suitable space. In Northern Europe, there's a considerable amount of publicly owned open land on the water. In the United States, the Eastern Seaboard is largely privately owned. And so there aren't many places where you can set up, say a 200-acre blade factory right on the water, as there are in Europe, right? Only maybe two or three sites, arguably two or three sites on the East Coast that fit that profile. The Jones Act, I'll just tell you a little bit about the Jones Act. The Jones Act provides essentially that any vessel that is transiting between two U.S. ports has to be U.S. flagged, U.S. manufactured, and crewed by U.S. citizens. And so what that means for the industry is that they can't shuttle back and forth to New Bedford and bring components out directly. There has to be on a vessel that doesn't meet those requirements. So. And there really isn't, as we speak, there isn't a Jones Act compliant vessel suitable for this work right now. There's one that is supposedly being manufactured in the Gulf. So what the industry is going to do is to take what in effect is a two-step approach. They will use what are called feeder barges, which are large barges that can carry wind components some distance, and then bring those out to jack-up barges, which actually do the work of installing the windmill components themselves. The foundation piece is the transition piece that they sell on the blades. So that's how that's. So is that an impediment to development? It is, in the sense that it's for sure more costly for developers to handle components and then rehandle them again out at sea, and it's trickier in the North Atlantic than it is in many places. They tell us to do that, so that all adds cost and slows down and that it slows down the installation of the wind farms. So that's something that they'll have to get over. But I don't think that's what's holding up the introduction of manufacturing here.
Give me a mental picture of it. So New Bedford has this wind facility on its harbor that the state built a number of years ago. So let's say there's components that are delivered there, and maybe they're assembled there. I'm making this up, but they're ready to go out to Vineyard Wind. A barge would carry them out part of the way and then transfer them to another barge that would actually install them.
Yeah.
Okay. Otherwise, you could have just one take it out and do it,
Right.
but you have to do it a two-step process. Okay. That does sound a little bit insane, but I get.
Yeah, the Jones Act is was meant to protect. Was a protectionist act, and back in the early 20s, I think it was enacted in the early 20s, just after World War I, and it was meant to protect the U.S. shipping industry, ship manufacturing industry.
And those 2 or 3 sites that you mentioned along the Eastern Seaboard for manufacturing facilities, because there's a lot of pent-up demand here where projects are eager to get going. Are any of them in Massachusetts?
So the most suitable sites for manufacturing in Massachusetts are along the Taunton River in Somerset and Fall River. The one that stands out the most is the former Brayton Point power plant site. which was demolished. I think it's still being demolished. The demolition started about 2 years ago. And that's, as you know, roughly a 250-acre site that with considerable water depth at the quayside. And that would be a good manufacturing site. I think there's a consensus that site would work pretty well.
So I've read stories about other states, New Jersey, New York, what have you, that are sort of making big plays to get manufacturing facilities for the foundations or what have you. What's your assessment of Massachusetts? Are we in the running? Are we making a strong case for Massachusetts? What should we be doing?
Well, it depends on who the we is. So I can assure you that that the city of New Bedford and the Port of New Bedford are doing everything we can to race ahead of everyone else. And in the time that we've been waiting for Vineyard Wind, we've been adding infrastructure. So we are either building now or have completed 3 more sites. None of them as large as the New Bedford Marine Commerce Terminal, but there are sites that are going to be used or could be used for offshore wind. I mean, there's going to be a lot of moving pieces in our harbor over the next several years, but we're modernizing the Port of New Bedford, and so we're going to be more ready to take on more industry business than even where we were a couple of years ago. But we are concerned, and we think that we're going to be able to fully modernize the port, especially now with the potential for a great deal more federal investment into ports, especially those that support green industries like offshore wind. My concern over time has been that Massachusetts has stood out among the Eastern Seaboard states that would like that are procuring offshore wind contracts as in its refusal to aggressively incentivize industry investment here. The reality is that the likes of New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, really every state down the Eastern Seaboard has made it a point to say, look, if you're going to do business with us, we want to make sure that you invest in our state. And Massachusetts has not taken that tact, and frankly, I think it hurts New Bedford more than any other place in Massachusetts. To give you an example, we've seen commitments for foundation manufacturing in New Jersey. We've seen commitments from developers to build port facilities in New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and pretty much every single state. We haven't seen any of that here as yet. The other big thing that concerns us is we haven't we've been frustrated here that insofar as there has been private investment in Massachusetts, it's almost entirely gone to Boston. Like Vineyard Wind has its project office here, but Vineyard Wind is a joint venture of 2 companies who both have offices in Boston. And the likes of Ørsted and Equinor and all the other developers and some of the major OEMs, General Electric, of course, but Siemens, Gamesa, and all the others have set up shop in Boston, and we haven't seen that level of private investment here. And that's not, frankly, an outcome that anybody was planning on when we started in on our offshore wind work several years ago. As much as offshore wind was about and has always been about dealing with climate change, it has been for us primarily an economic development initiative. And so, and seen in that light, it's been a little frustrating that we're only seeing private investment in Boston. So, we've made that point really clear to the Baker administration and to the utilities that the difference in procurement here fundamentally vis-a-vis the other states on the East Coast is that the procurement process here is controlled almost exclusively by the utilities. So that process hasn't yielded, to my mind, optimum public interest outcomes.
Interesting. So to sum up, it's sort of, I hear two things from you. One is sort of an optimism. A lot of money is going to be flowing into New Bedford, a lot of positive developments there, but also sort of some concern about you might be missing out on the true potential. Am I summing that up accurately?
The best case, so I think that it's accurate as far as it goes. I would say it this way: there are two polarities, right? The worst case scenario is one in which there is business here brought by the offshore wind industry. In other words, they use our docks, but they set up windmills in places, in all the wrong places, up and down the eastern seaboard, and crowd out the fishing industry, which would hurt New Bedford more than any other place. That's the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is windmills are put in appropriate places and the offshore wind industry, so that the fishing industry can continue to thrive here. And there is considerable private investment from the offshore wind industry here. In other words, they set up not just front offices, but also the much of the supply chain here. So we'll probably end up somewhere between those two poles. And the closer we are to the latter one, the better. That's a long way of saying yes to your question.
I hear you. Let's move to a couple other topics briefly, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
One is, we talked about this before. You're a mayor who has been concerned about the trend of local news coverage, particularly in New Bedford, but it sort of sounds like you're, like a lot of people, you're worried about it across the state, across the country, really. Talk a little bit about that, because you and I got a chance to talk recently when this group is trying to launch a news website in New Bedford, New Bedford Light, and you're welcoming more coverage of what's going on in your community. Why is that? Why a lot of politicians could care less if anyone's writing about what they're up to. Why are you so interested in it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I get the inclination of a lot of elected officials not to invite scrutiny, but I would be less than honest with you if I said that less scrutiny as a result of the diminution of local media coverage is more comfortable than the opposite, right? You don't have to explain yourself all the time, but the reality is that no city can function properly in the absence of a trusted and functioning media source. And those media sources that are trusted and functioning ordinarily are newspapers, whether they are digital or print or some combination of the two. That's what people turn to when they want to know the facts. And so I have been deeply concerned that our venerable city paper, which was founded in 1850, the New Bedford Standard Times, has not been able to cover New Bedford and Greater New Bedford in the way that will allow for sustainable accountability of public officials, for one thing, but even beyond that, would enable the city to act collectively on the big challenges. And public accountability is really important. It's often cited as the primary purpose of the Fourth Estate. And it's true as far as it goes, but I think one thing that's overlooked is something that I've grown to appreciate more and more as mayor, is that trusted news sources are responsible for telling the narrative of the place. We need, in order for people to come together and tackle what's in front of them collectively, they need to have a sense of identity that can only be facilitated, to my mind, by having somebody that is some entity that is a trusted arbiter of the truth. And many cities around the country are losing that. And so I think it may not be in my enlightened self-interest to invite more scrutiny, but we do invite it. We invite it from folks that are going to take the place seriously, and not folks who are sniping from afar, but folks who who care about the place, who live it, and who just simply want to tell the truth.
Now, you've been sort of active in promoting this, in supporting the notion of greater news coverage. Should public officials in Massachusetts, the legislature, should there be more public involvement, do you feel, or is it?
You mean public funding, or do you mean just more people singing from that same sheet of music?
I'm not sure what the answer is. I'm an old newspaper guy. I'm sort of resist the idea of public funding, but there's a commission looking at this now at the state level. Do you think something needs to be done, or do you feel like the marketplace will work itself out?
Yeah, I don't have a good answer. I'm not sure anybody does. I'm not sure. So, you could say at some level, you could just say, well, there's coverage. It's a very competitive market for news out there, maybe more competitive than ever before because of the way that people use the internet. But there's something that's lost, and the something that's lost is what I just described, which is sort of this, understanding of place that traditional news sources were able to convey. And so some cities have embraced sort of the noblesse oblige model, right? So if you have a high net worth person who, can run a news enterprise at either a modest profit or even no profit, and just sort of, keep one's and remain at arm's length, good news can be generated that way. There aren't many places that have folks that are willing to do that. There are examples, with the Globe and the Washington Post and a few other newspapers around the United States. But in most places, it's a nonprofit model that is really the only option. And it's a model that isn't constrained by any expectations of a return on investment by the folks who own the enterprise. So, to my mind, that's probably the most even-handed way to do it. It still raises the question: well, how do you pay everybody, right? How do you pay the reporters and the editors who are generating, the content? And so, that's where business communities have to step in and support. I mean, it's obviously something that you guys have experienced at Commonwealth, and that's hard, and not every place can pull that off. But I think that's what the folks at the New Bedford Light are trying to do, and they're serious folks. They're very experienced journalists, and they're giving it the college try, and we're hopeful that they're going to be able to do it. In answer to your question, Bruce, I'd say, the public funding, it's really hard to come up with a public funding mechanism that's consistent with the First Amendment and is otherwise, it can be implemented in an even-handed way. We've thought here about, we're tossing around ideas here that are analogous to like the Community Preservation Act, where you impose like sort of a fee on people's property tax assessments, and that would go to some, for local journalism in some way. But then you end up with, procurement constraints, and like you have some money, like who's entitled to it, and like who makes those decisions, and it just becomes very difficult to do to pull off in a credible way. So it really does have to come sort of organically from the community, and more specifically from the business community, which has in many places has the resources to help out considerably.
That's very interesting. Well, I'm always fascinated listening to you talk about this issue, because I don't have those conversations with too many other people in public life.
Yeah, I think what it means, Bruce, is that I'm still 9 years into this job, a political novice. I haven't lost my innocence yet.
Well, Mayor, I think we're out of time, but I wanted to thank you for joining us today and appreciate it. We're going to have you back because there's a lot more to talk about, especially as this industry starts taking off. It's going to be fascinating to watch what happens in New Bedford. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks for having me.